At 26, Maya Cole walked out of a Navy SEAL base with $50, no family, and a question she couldn't answer. 3 weeks later, a half-starved military dog nobody wanted changed everything, and a sealed room with her name on the wall gave her back something she never knew she'd lost. Subscribe before this gets taken down. The discharge paperwork came in a manila envelope, the same shade of beige as every other envelope Maya Thomas Cole had received from the United States Navy in 8 years. She sat across from Lieutenant Commander Dewhurst in his office at Naval Station Oceana, Virginia, and watched him slide it across the desk with the careful precision of a man who had done this too many times to feel it anymore. Outside the window, an F. A. 18 climbed hard off the runway and tore a clean line through the November sky. Maya didn't watch it go. She already knew what disappearing looked like. Dewhurst folded his hands on the desk. He was a decent man, the kind who remembered birthdays and actually meant it when he asked how you were doing. That made this harder. "Your contract concludes at 1,700 today," he said. "The renewal offer stands through end of business. You don't have to decide right now." Maya looked at the envelope. She didn't touch it yet. "I've decided," she said. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they respect something they don't fully understand. He slid a second form across the desk, the re-enlistment paperwork crisp and unsigned. Maya looked at it for 3 seconds. Then she pushed it back. She didn't explain. There was nothing to explain that a form could contain. Inside the discharge envelope, $50 in a government check made out to Maya T. Cole, an expired military ID she was supposed to surrender, but somehow ended up keeping, and a thin, photocopied file, the kind that followed you from placement to placement when the state of Virginia couldn't find anyone willing to keep you past a school year. Her whole life before the Navy fit inside something thinner than a magazine. She opened the file out of habit, the way you press a bruise to confirm it still hurts. Birth certificate. Mother Grace Cole, deceased. Father Thomas Cole, deceased. A single Polaroid of herself as a toddler sitting on a linoleum floor in clothes, 2 sizes too big. One hand reaching toward the edge of the frame like she was trying to grab onto something just out of reach. She'd carried that photograph through 7 foster homes, 3 states, 8 years of service, 2 deployments, and 1 mission she would never be able to talk about. It was the only evidence she'd ever been small enough for someone to hold. She tucked it back in and closed the file. The last page of her discharge packet had a standard form she'd filled out 3 times over her career emergency contact information. Name. Relationship. Phone number. She had left it blank every time. 8 years of forms. 8 years of boxes, checked fields, completed signatures, rendered. This was the only box she had never been able to fill. She stared at it for a moment, then folded the whole packet and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket against her ribs. Dewhurst cleared his throat. "There are support programs. VA transition services, housing assistance, career placement, I know," Maya said. "I know about the programs." She stood up and picked up her duffel bag. Everything she owned fit inside. 2 changes of civilian clothes, a toothbrush, a phone charger, a dog-eared paperback she'd been reading since Bahrain, and the discharge envelope. Dewhurst stood too because he was that kind of man. He extended his hand. She shook it. "You were one of the best we had," he said, and she believed him, which somehow made it worse. "Thank you, Commander." She walked out of his office down the corridor with its linoleum floors and fluorescent lights, through the double doors and out into the cold November air. At the main gate, she handed over her base access badge and received a paper receipt in return. The guard, young, probably 22, probably just starting, gave her a nod that was almost a salute. She nodded back, and then she was on the other side of the gate. The road stretched south toward the highway. A gas station sign blinked orange against the grey afternoon. She stood on the sidewalk with her duffel over one shoulder and let the wind come off the water and move through her. She had $50, no family, no address, and a question she didn't know how to ask out loud yet. She had spent 8 years walking into places other people ran from. She had done it without flinching, without hesitating, without ever needing to know why. But standing on the outside of that gate, in civilian clothes, with no mission and no orders, and no name on any emergency contact form, the question finally surfaced the way things surface, when there's nothing left to suppress them. Who had she been doing it for? She didn't have an answer. She started walking south. By the end of the second week, Maya had $22 left and a system. She slept in Eastgate Park, behind the maintenance shed, where the security camera pointed at the wrong angle. She'd mapped the guard's rotation on the first night out of habit, the same way she'd mapped patrol routes in places she couldn't name. She ate at a church soup kitchen on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The other days, she bought the cheapest food she could find, a loaf of bread that lasted 3 days if she rationed it, a jar of peanut butter that stretched to 5. She washed her clothes in a gas station sink at 2 in the morning under buzzing fluorescent lights, wringing them out over a drain that smelled like old oil. She had the skills to do better. She knew how to build a shelter, source water, navigate without a phone. She knew how to disappear into an environment and make herself invisible. She chose not to use any of it. This was the rule. She had made herself no tactical advantage, no military solutions. If she was going to figure out how to exist as a civilian, she was going to do it as one. She was failing, and she knew it. And she kept going anyway. Because failing at something real felt more honest than succeeding at something she'd already mastered. Her phone died on the 15th day. She couldn't afford the library's outlet fee, and without the phone, she lost track of the soup kitchen schedule. She walked 12 blocks on a Thursday to find the location had moved, and there was no way she could have known. She drank water from a park fountain and sat on a bench in the cold and tried to remember the last time someone had said her name out loud. She couldn't. On the 8th night, just after midnight, she was sitting with her back against the maintenance shed when she heard it, a low sound. Not quite a whimper coming from under the park bench 6 feet away. She went still the way she'd been trained, to go still, and looked. Under the bench, a German shepherd lay curled in on itself. The dog was thin in a way that took time, ribs visible beneath a coat that had once been healthy, legs tucked tight against a belly that had nothing left to give. But it was the collar that stopped her breath. Metal. Military issue. Scratched down to the base metal. The engraved unit code, almost unreadable, but she could make out enough. USNK 9. She moved slowly the way you move around, anything that has learned to expect the worst from people. She sat cross-legged on the cold ground, 2 feet from the bench, and didn't reach out, just waited. The dog didn't move. She opened her bag and took out the last half of a bread loaf and tore a piece off. She set it on the ground between them and moved her hand away. Nothing happened for a long time. Then, the dog's head lifted barely, and its nostrils worked the air. It looked at the bread. It looked at her. It looked at the bread again, with the expression of an animal that has been disappointed enough times to be suspicious of good things. She understood that. She didn't say anything. She just waited. The dog uncurled itself slowly and stretched its neck forward without standing, and took the bread off the ground with extraordinary gentleness. She tore another piece and set it down. They worked through half the loaf that way, piece by piece, neither of them moving faster than the other could handle. When the bread was gone, the dog stood up for the first time. It was tall, taller than she'd realized, and its legs were steadier than its condition suggested. It walked to her and stood in front of her and looked at her face with dark eyes that had seen things the same way she looked at people who had been in combat, with the particular attentiveness of those who have learned that reading a process situation quickly is how you stay alive." She let it sniff her hands. She didn't pet it yet. "I'm going to call you Ranger," she said. Her own voice surprised her. It was the first time she'd spoken in 2 days. Ranger sat down, not trained to sit, just sat the way a decision looks from the outside. That night, Ranger led her around the back of the gas station to an exterior outlet under the utility panel, half hidden behind a dumpster. Maya plugged in her phone. While it charged, she sat with her back against the cinder block wall, and Ranger pressed warm and solid against her left side. When the phone had enough battery to load a browser, she found a county auction listing for Caldwell County, Virginia. 12 properties. The last one read "Former Fire Station No. 7 Briggs Road, Harlow Creek. Starting bid $15. She read it twice. She had $22. She read it a third time. Then the phone died again. Harlow Creek had a population sign that said 4200, but the main street made that number feel like optimism. Maya walked in from the highway at dawn, with Ranger at her left heel. The same position a working K9 takes. Without being told she hadn't asked him to. He'd simply assumed the post somewhere around mile 3 and stayed there. The town had a hardware store, a diner with a hand-lettered specials board in the window, a courthouse with a bulletin board papered in flyers for bake sales and missing cats, and the particular stillness of a place that had stopped expecting anything dramatic to happen. The auction was at 10. She had 2 hours. She found the county assessor's office in the courthouse basement and asked to look at the property file for Station 7. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, studied Maya for a moment, the boots, the duffel, the dog, and then pulled the file without comment. Maya read it, standing at the counter. The fire station had been decommissioned in 2018 following a county consolidation. Single-story brick and steel construction, approximately 3,800 square feet, erected in 1961. The assessment listed structural deterioration, standing water-compromised ceiling tiles, and non-functioning utilities. An appraiser's note from 2021 read, "Salvage value minimal, demolition recommended." Below it someone had added, in red, "Penn County has received 1 development inquiry pending." She handed the file back. "Thank you," she said. The clerk glanced at Ranger. "He yours, yes ma'am. He looks like a working dog." "He was," Maya said. The clerk looked at her over the glasses. "So did you," she said, not unkindly, and went back to her filing. The auction took place on the courthouse lawn folding chairs, in neat rows on the brown November grass. About 30 people attended, most of them local. They waved at each other, traded comments about properties, the way people talk about things they already know the endings of. A man in a fleece vest bought a vacant lot for $400 without looking up from his phone. A condemned house went to a woman bidding by proxy for someone on speaker. Maya sat in the last row of chairs with Ranger at her feet and ran the math one more time. $15 for the station left her with $7 and a condemned building she couldn't sell, couldn't heat, couldn't legally occupy. It was by any reasonable calculation the worst thing she could do with her last money. The building had probably been stripped. The plumbing was certainly shot. The electrical was dead. She'd need permits, just to turn the water back on. She had $7. The math never changed, no matter how many times she ran it. And yet, she kept coming back to one thing she couldn't square away. Someone had put her name on a board inside that building. She hadn't told anyone she was coming. She hadn't known herself until 3 days ago, but her name was in there, written in someone else's hand, waiting. The fire station came up last on the list. The county clerk at the microphone read the description in a flat, official voice, single-story brick and steel, Decommissioned 2018 county assessment notes, structural deterioration, and standing water minimum bid, $15. He let the silence sit. Nobody moved. In the second row, a man in grey trousers turned in his chair and surveyed the crowd with the patient expression of someone confirming what he already expected. He had silver hair and the particular stillness of someone accustomed to winning by waiting. He didn't raise his hand. He was waiting for the lot to revert to the county. Maya raised her hand. The silver-haired man's eyes found her immediately. Not surprised, recalculating. $15 from the young woman in the back, the clerk said. Do I hear 20? Silence. A woman in the front row turned around and looked at Maya the way people look at someone standing too close to the edge of something. The silver-haired man had gone very still. 15 going once. 15 going twice. The clerk looked out over the lawn one more time. Sold. Ranger lifted his head when she stood up. She put her hand on his neck once briefly, and he stood with her. Inside the clerk's office, she signed the transfer paperwork and paid with a $15 bill from her wallet. The clerk, a different one, younger, who kept looking at Ranger with undisguised warmth, handed her a key on a plain metal ring. You know what you're buying? He asked. Not entirely, she said. He almost smiled. Good luck with that one. She put the key in her jacket pocket, next to the discharge envelope, next to the Polaroid. She had $7 and a building she'd never seen the inside of, and someone had written her name on a wall inside it. That was enough to start with. Briggs Road was 3 blocks off Main Street, and the station sat at the end of it like something the town had collectively agreed to stop looking at. The concrete pad was cracked in long diagonals, weeds pushing through every fault line with the patience of things that have time on their side. The brick walls had darkened to the color of dried blood from years of weather. The 2 bay doors at the front were jammed halfway open, not broken open. Maya noticed, but arrested mid-motion, as if whoever had closed this place had stopped before finishing the job. She ducked under the nearest bay door and stepped inside. The truck bay was large and ruined and structurally sound. She walked the perimeter the way she walked, any new space methodically starting at the corners, checking what held weight and what had given up. Half the ceiling tiles had collapsed into a grey heap near the center drain. Standing water pooled in the low corner, fed by a crack in the foundation that had been working at it for years. But the brick walls were solid. She pressed her palm flat against one and felt nothing flex. The steel beams overhead showed surface rust and nothing worse. The concrete floor beneath the debris was level. A building could be saved from neglect. It couldn't be saved from bad bones. This one had good bones. Her third foster father, a contractor named Dwayne Pruitt, who had put her to work every Saturday whether she wanted to or not, had taught her the difference between a building dying and one that had simply been left alone too long. She hadn't thanked him for it at the time. She was thanking him now. Ranger moved through the space beside her nose, working the floor in the focused way that meant he was mapping rather than tracking. He checked the bathroom, no door on the hinges, a sink with no water, a mirror with a long crack across it. He checked the bunk room with its 4 metal bed frames, bolted to the walls. Mattresses, long gone. He checked the kitchen, which had a counter and a sink and nothing else. He was thorough and unhurried, the way a professional works, a space, and Maya let him do it without interference, because she recognized the behavior he was clearing the building. When they reached the locker bay at the far back of the station, Ranger's pace changed, not urgent, deliberate. He moved to the far end of the row of 6 red lockers, put his nose to the floor at the base of the wall, and began working back and forth along the seam where the cinder block met the concrete. Maya watched him for a moment, then crouched and looked at the wall. Every surface in the station was original red brick, with white mortar, consistent uniform load-bearing. The wall behind the lockers was cinder block. Grey, different mortar, different texture. The seam where it met the brick was visible on both sides of the row. Somebody had built this wall after the station was constructed. It was not part of the original structure. She knocked on the cinder block near the left edge solid. She moved her knuckle closer to the last locker and knocked again. Hollow. She got down on her stomach and looked under the locker row. At the base of the wall, the blocks didn't quite meet the floor, a gap of half an inch, maybe less. Through it, she felt a slow, steady flow of cool air, the kind that comes from a sealed space that has been breathing very quietly for a long time. Ranger sat back on his haunches and looked at her. She looked at the lockers. They were welded together, bolted to the concrete floor. She tried to move the end unit and it didn't budge. She'd need tools. She stood up, brushed the concrete dust off her jacket and looked at the wall. Someone had sealed this room deliberately. Someone had gone to significant trouble to hide whatever was behind it. And somewhere in there, on a board she hadn't seen yet, was her name. She walked back through the building, ducked under the bay door, and stood on the cracked concrete pad in the thin afternoon light. Across the street, a hardware store sat on the corner. The sign read Santos Hardware in hand-painted letters repainted. So many times the edges had built up thick. She looked at the store. She looked back at the station. She had $7 a sealed wall, and a German shepherd who had already found the door. She crossed the street. The bell above the door rang when she pushed it open. Santos Hardware was narrow and deep shelves stacked floor to ceiling with tools and fasteners and cans of paint organized in a system that made sense only to the person who had built it over decades. A radio on the counter played country music at low volume. Behind the register, a man in his late 50s with broad shoulders and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead looked up when she walked in. He took in the duffel bag, the boots, the dog at her heel, and didn't say anything for a moment. "Help you," he said. "I need a socket wrench set and a pry bar," Maya said. "What are you working on?" "The fire station across the street." Something moved across the man's face, not surprise exactly, more like recognition of a thing he hadn't expected to happen but had, in some unexamined way, been waiting for. "You're the one who bought it at the auction," he said. "Word travels fast. Town this size, there isn't much else." He came around the counter without hurrying and led her down the main aisle. He pulled a red case from the shelf and handed it over. She found the price sticker, $22. She had $7. "I have $7, she said. She didn't see the point in pretending. He looked at her, then out the window toward the station, then back at her. The calculation he was running wasn't about money. "Take the socket set," he said. "Bring it back when you're done. I'll pay you. I know you will." He extended his hand. "Ray Santos. I own the place." She shook it. "Maya Cole." He held the handshake a beat, longer than necessary, looking at her the way people look at a name they've heard before but can't place. Then he let go and went back behind the counter. On the way, he stopped at a small refrigerator and pulled out a brown paper bag. He set it next to the socket case on the counter. "Sandwich and coffee," he said. "My wife makes extra." Maya looked at the bag. She hadn't eaten since the heel of the bread loaf the night before. She thought about the soup kitchen receipt in her pocket, the one that required a county services ID she'd never gotten around to applying for. She thought about 8 years of eating, when the mess hall said to eat. She tried to remember the last time someone had handed her food without asking for anything in return, no form. No ID, no explanation of why she needed it. She couldn't. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me. Just bring the tools back." She was almost to the door when Ray spoke again. "Cole," he said. She turned. He was looking at Ranger, with the particular attention of someone who knows what they're looking at. That dog's got K9 training. Look at the way he's standing. Ranger was positioned at the door with his weight distributed evenly on all 4 feet. Head slightly lowered, eyes moving between the street and the room in a slow sweep. The posture of a dog who has been taught that every threshold is an intelligence problem. He was Navy K9, Maya said. Like you, Ray said. It wasn't a question. She looked at him. My son did 2 tours, he said. By way of explanation. By way of saying, I know what that looks like, and I'm not going to make it strange. He went into the back and came out with a bag of premium dog food. The kind with a military working dog on the label. He set it on the counter. Kept it around, he said. Habit. Ranger crossed the store without being told. Ate from the bag. Ray poured into a bowl he found under the counter, and then lay down at Ray's feet with his chin on his paws. The ease of it, the immediate, uncomplicated trust, stopped something in Maya's chest. She stood in the doorway with the socket set and the paper bag and watched her dog settle next to a stranger like he'd known him for years. He doesn't do that with people, she said. Ray looked down at Ranger. Sounds like he's adjusting his standards. She laughed. It came out before she could decide whether to let it. Small and unused, sounding like a door opened in a room that had been closed for a long time. She carried the socket set and the paper bag across the street. She sat on the concrete pad and ate the sandwich ham, Swiss yellow mustard on sourdough, and drank the coffee black and still warm, and looked at the station. Then she went to work. Later, when the locker row had been unbolted and dragged aside, when the cinder block wall had been examined, and the outline of a steel door found under a skim coat of grey paint, when Maya was crouching in front of the door with the pry bar in her hands and her heart doing something complicated in her chest, she looked back and saw Ranger sitting at the entrance to the locker bay, watching her with the focused patience of an animal who already knows how this ends. She turned back to the door. She worked the bar into the seam. The lock gave with a sound like something exhaling, slow and deliberate, the way things sound when they've been holding their breath for a long time. Inside was a room, a desk, filing cabinets, a safe bolted to the floor, photographs on the walls. 40 years of a life, sealed and waiting. And on the small chalkboard mounted beside the door in neat, careful letters, still legible after years in the dark. If you're reading this, welcome home, Maya. She stood in the doorway for a long time without going in. Ranger came and sat beside her, warm against her left leg, and together they looked at the room that had been waiting for her since before she knew she was looking for it. She didn't go through everything at once. That was the first decision she made, standing in the doorway of Harold Webb's sealed office with the smell of old paper and cedar and closed air moving around her. She was a person who processed information methodically, who had been trained to read a room before entering it, to identify threats and assets before committing to a position. She applied that discipline now, partly because it was the only way she knew how to approach anything that mattered, and partly because she understood the way you understand things in your body. Before your mind catches up that what was in this room could change the shape of everything, she thought. She knew about herself, and she needed to be ready for that before she let it. She started with the filing cabinets, equipment logs, payroll records, insurance documents, 4 decades of a fire station's administrative life, organized in Harold Webb's careful hand. In the bottom drawer of the second cabinet, wedged behind a stack of yellow tax documents, she found a manila folder. The tab was labeled in the same handwriting as the chalkboard. Cole family. Urgent. She carried it to the desk and sat in the chair. The desk was solid oak, worn at the corners, the surface marked with rings from 40 years of coffee cups. She set the folder down and put her hands flat on either side of it and looked at it for a moment. Ranger lay down at her feet, under the desk. She could feel the warmth of him against her boots. She opened the folder. 3 items. The first was a photograph of a newborn in a hospital bassinet, wrapped in a white blanket with a blue stripe. A tag on the bassinet read, "Baby Girl Cole." The date on the tag said April 1998. The baby's face was red and scrunched, and impossibly small. Maya reached into her jacket and took out the Polaroid from her discharge file. The toddler on the linoleum floor. She held them side by side. Same nose. Same slight upturn at the corners of the mouth. Same way the ears sat against the skull. She set both photographs down and looked at the wall above the desk. Then she picked up the second item, a newspaper, clipping yellowed and brittle at the edges. The headline read, "2 volunteer firefighters killed in school blaze." Below it, a photograph of an elementary school with smoke still rising from the roof. And below that, 2 smaller photographs. A man 32 years old with dark eyes and a square jaw. A woman 30 with high cheekbones and a steady gaze that looked directly into the camera with the particular calm of someone who has made peace with difficulty. Thomas Cole and Grace Cole. Survived by their daughter, Maya Thomas Cole, 6 years old. Maya read the line 3 times. Maya Thomas Cole. Her name. Her full legal name. The one on the birth certificate in the manila folder from the state of Virginia. Her eyes moved back to the photographs of the man and the woman. She looked at them for a long time, long enough for Ranger to lift his head and look up at her reading something in the quality of her stillness. She looked at Tom Cole's jaw and recognized it. She looked at Grace Cole's eyes and recognized those too. She had spent 26 years looking at her own face and not knowing whose features she was borrowing. Now she knew. She stood up intending to step outside, to get air to put space between herself and the information before it finished arriving. She made it 2 steps before she stopped. She turned back. She looked at Grace Cole's photograph again, the calm gaze, the quiet certainty of a woman who had decided who she was going to be and had simply been that person, without apology. Maya went back to the desk. She sat down. She picked up the third item, a larger photograph printed on heavy stock. A man and a woman standing in front of the fire station. This fire station. This building, both in volunteer turnout gear, the bay doors open behind them, a fire engine gleaming in the shadows. The man's arm was around the woman's shoulder. The woman had one hand on her hip and was looking at the camera with an expression Maya recognized because she had seen it in every mirror for 26 years without knowing where it came from. On the back, in careful handwriting, Tom and Grace Cole. Station the 7th of September, 2003. 1 year before the fire. She held that photograph and the Polaroid side by side in the thin light coming through the office's small window, and she saw her own face divided between theirs, her mother's jaw, her father's eyes, a nose that belonged to both of them. They were her parents. They were firefighters who had volunteered at this station, and they had died running into a burning building to save 14 children they had never met. She felt something move through her, not grief exactly, or not only grief, something wider. She had spent 8 years running into places other people ran from and never being able to answer the question of why it felt so natural, so inevitable, so much like the only possible response to a given situation. She was looking at the answer. It was in the photographs in her hands. She pressed her back into the chair and closed her eyes. Ranger put his head in her lap. She didn't push him away. She sat in the sealed room that Harold Webb had kept for her and let herself feel the full weight of being found. The house was 3 blocks east of the station, small and white, with a chain-link fence and a front garden that had been tended once and was now half wild. Rose bushes gone leggy along the fence line. A stone path almost swallowed by grass. A porch with 2 chairs and a side table holding a coffee mug that had been sitting there long enough to leave a ring. Maya knocked. It took a while. She heard movement inside, slow and deliberate, the sounds of someone who had learned to take their time. Then the door opened halfway, and the woman looked at her through the gap. She was small and white-haired, with sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have outlasted their grief without being diminished by it. She was somewhere past 80, and she looked at Maya the way you look at something you have been expecting for so long that its arrival feels less like surprise and more like completion. The woman's hand came up and gripped the edge of the door. "Good Lord," she said. Her knuckles went white. "You have her eyes." Maya went still. "Tom's too," the woman said. "But the eyes, those are Grace's." Maya opened her mouth. "My name is Maya Cole," she said. "I bought the fire station at the tax auction. I found some things inside, and I was hoping I know who you are," the woman said. She opened the door the rest of the way. "I'm Lottie Webb. I've been waiting for you for 20 years. Come inside." The living room was small and full of photographs. A couch with a crocheted blanket. A bookshelf, organized with the particular logic of a lifelong reader. A television that looked like it hadn't been turned on recently. The house smelled like tea and lavender soap, and the particular warmth of a place inhabited consistently and carefully for a very long time. Lottie moved to the kitchen and put the kettle on. Her hands shook slightly, but she didn't spill anything. Maya sat at the kitchen table and waited. Ranger came in behind her and crossed the kitchen and sat down in the far corner near the window. Lottie turned around and stopped. She looked at Ranger for a long moment. Her expression changed in the way that faces change when something hits a very old nerve. "Harold had a German shepherd," she said. "Named Scout. Died in 2015. She paused. "He used to sit in that corner every morning while Harold drank his coffee." She looked at the corner. She looked at Ranger. "Right there," she said quietly. She brought 2 mugs to the table and sat across from Maya. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't reach for anything to wipe them. She just let them be wet and kept her hands wrapped around her mug and looked at Maya with the steady attentiveness of someone who has rehearsed this moment many times in private. "Harold told me you'd come," she said. "He said it might take years. He said you might never come at all, but he believed you would." "How did he know my name?" Maya asked. "He knew your parents," Lottie said. "He knew everything about you that the county would give him, and a good deal they wouldn't. 3 years before you left the Navy, he wrote to your command. Just wanted to know you were alive." They wrote back one line that a Maya Cole was serving. He folded that letter and kept it in the journal. Maya thought about a letter going into a chain of command and stopping there, never reaching her. She thought about Harold Webb sitting in his sealed office with a one-line confirmation that she was alive and deciding that was enough to wait on. "The trust was drawn up properly," Lottie said, as if reading the question on Maya's face. "But Harold couldn't name you in the public record without your consent. You were a minor in the foster system, and later a private citizen with no known address. The county held the tax delinquency separately. Harold let it accumulate on purpose. He said the taxes would be the thread. Whoever came looking would pull it." "Tell me about them," Maya said. "Your parents." Lottie took a sip of her tea. "Tom was a carpenter. Best framing eye Harold ever saw. He could make a wall plumb without a level. He rebuilt the engine bay doors, patched the roof twice, fixed the plumbing when the county said they couldn't afford a contractor. He was patient about most things, and completely impatient about anything done halfway." She set her mug down. Grace was an ER nurse at Caldwell General. She joined the volunteers because Tom asked her to, and in 3 months, she was the best trauma response we had. Quiet, steady. She could stop a man's bleeding while everyone else was still looking for the gauze. Lottie looked at Maya with something that wasn't quite a smile. "You have her hands," she said, "the way you hold things." Maya looked at her own hands around the mug. "They fell in love at the station." Lottie continued. Harold used to say the truck bay was their living room. When you were born, Tom painted the nursery yellow because Grace said yellow was the color of patience. She paused. You were 6 years old when the school caught fire. Maya waited. Middle of the school day, Lottie said. Electrical fault in the basement. The second floor filled with smoke in minutes. 14 children trapped. Tom and Grace were first on scene. They sent every child out through the windows, carried them, handed them down one after another. She stopped. The stairwell collapsed while they were on the second floor. They couldn't get back out. The kitchen was quiet. The clock above the stove ticked. Through the window, the overgrown rose bushes were moving slightly in a wind Maya couldn't feel. Harold tried to find you afterward, Lottie said. For years. He never stopped. She looked down at her hands. He left everything in the station. He said you'd understand it better coming from him than from me. Maya's throat closed. She looked at the table. They loved you, Lottie said. Her voice was quiet and direct. The voice of someone delivering something important and wanting to make sure it arrives. They loved you from the minute you were born. I want you to know that without any qualification, they loved you completely. Maya didn't speak. She pressed her hands flat on the table surface and felt the solidity of it and didn't speak. The safe was under the desk, bolted to the concrete floor, grey steel, the size of a microwave, a keyhole where a handle might have been. Maya had seen it on her first pass through the office and noted it the way she noted everything: file, under unknown, return when tools are available. Lottie saw it the moment she stepped into the office for the first time since Harold had sealed the door. She stopped in the doorway and looked at the desk, the photographs on the walls, the journal open to Harold's last entry. Her hand went to her mouth. She stood for a full minute without speaking. Then she walked around the desk and touched the surface with her fingertips. The worn oak, the coffee rings, the brass letter opener Harold had used for 40 years. He spent more time in this room than in our house, she said finally. I used to tell him the station was his real home. He'd say, Lottie, the station is everybody's home. That's the whole point. She looked down. The safe, she said. Is it still there? Maya crouched and confirmed it was. Harold put it in years ago, Lottie said. He told me what was inside. He told me it was for you. She reached into the collar of her blouse and drew out a thin chain. On the end of it hung a brass key, small and worn smooth from years of body heat. She unclasped the chain and held the key out in her open palm. He gave me this the week before he died, she said. He told me to keep it until the girl came. I've worn it every day for 8 years. Maya looked at the key. She looked at the safe. She took the key and knelt in front of the safe and held it above the lock. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. That was the training that was 8 years of being the person who holds steady when nothing else does. She turned the key. The lock resisted for a moment, then gave with a clean click, and the door swung open. 3 items inside, each separate and deliberate the way things look when they've been placed with care by someone who expected them to be found by a specific person. A leather document folder, dark brown, cracked at the spine. A thick manila envelope sealed with no writing on the outside, and a white envelope sealed with wax that had yellowed over years, with Maya Cole written across the front in the same careful handwriting she had seen on the chalkboard, on the filing tabs in the journal margins. Lottie stood behind her with one hand on the desk. She didn't speak. Maya lifted each item out and set them on the desk. She opened the leather folder first. Inside was a property deed for the fire station, signed, notarized, dated 12 years ago. Harold Briggs Webb had purchased the property from Caldwell County for $25,000 of his own pension. The station had never been abandoned. It had been Harold's. At the bottom of the deed in the margin, in Harold's handwriting, initialed and countersigned by a county clerk upon the death of Harold R. Webb. This property transfers to a trust held at Caldwell County Courthouse. Designated beneficiary, Maya Thomas Cole, daughter of Thomas E. Cole and Grace M. Cole. The tax auction had not sold the station. It had sold the right to pay back taxes on a property Harold already owned. The $15 Maya had paid at the auction had cleared the tax delinquency. The station had always been intended for her. Lottie made a soft sound. She lowered herself into the chair across the desk and pressed her hands flat on the surface. "He always said the station would find you," she said. He meant it literally. Maya opened the manila envelope. Bank documents. An account at Caldwell County Savings. Titled, Station 7 Community Fund. Contribution records going back 40 years. A trust agreement with one designated beneficiary. The balance statement dated 8 years ago. The last entry before Harold died showed $330,000. Maya set the paper down. She read the number again. She turned through the contribution records. $50 here, $100 there, $25, $30. Some entries larger, $200 or $300 marked with notes. Pancake breakfast March. Car wash June. Community fundraiser. December. Every firefighter who had served at the station had contributed. Townspeople had donated at events without knowing what the money was for. Over 40 years, the small amounts had built into something Harold had designated entirely for the daughter of Tom and Grace Cole. Maya picked up the white envelope. The wax seal cracked when she slid her thumb under the flap. Inside 2 pages, handwritten on both sides, in the same faded blue ink as the journal, neater and slower, the handwriting of someone taking their time with something that mattered. She looked at Lottie. "Can I read it out loud?" Lottie nodded. Her eyes were already wet. Maya unfolded the pages and read, "Dear Maya, I don't know how old you'll be when you read this. I've spent 12 years looking for you. If you're reading this, the station found you instead." Lottie put her hand over her mouth. "Your parents were Tom and Grace Cole. Tom was a carpenter and the finest volunteer I ever trained. Grace was an ER nurse and the bravest woman I've known in my life. They served at this station for 4 years. They loved the work and they loved each other. And when you were born, Tom painted the nursery yellow and Grace brought you to the station in a car seat and set you on my desk while she ran drills. You were the happiest baby I'd ever seen." Maya's voice caught. She swallowed and kept reading. "On October 14, 2004, the elementary school on Maple Street caught fire. 14 children were trapped on the 2nd floor. Your parents were first through the door. They got every child out, every single one. They saved 14 lives that day. The stairwell collapsed before they could get back down. Your mother and father did not die in a fire. They died running into one because there were children inside who needed them. There is no better way to describe who they were. I tried to find you. I called the county. I called the state. I wrote letters. I hired a man to search. The foster system had rules I couldn't get around. I spent 12 years trying. I never stopped. I started the fund at this station 40 years ago because I believed every community needs a safety net that doesn't require paperwork. Small amounts from everyone over time. We helped families with medical bills, funerals, housing, college. I never put my name on it. People accept help more easily when they don't have to say thank you. After Tom and Grace died, I set aside the largest portion for you. It isn't charity. It's what your parents earned, by the way they lived, and the way they served. I bought this station with my own money because the county wanted to tear it down. I couldn't let that happen. This is where your parents worked and laughed and fell in love. This is where they left from on the day they saved those children. If I can't bring them back, I can at least make sure their station stays standing until you find it. Everything you need is here. Use it however you see fit. Help people. Be the kind of woman your parents would recognize. And one more thing, Maya paused. Her hands had begun to shake slightly, not from fear. From something harder to name. A feeling of ground, shifting to level beneath her feet. She read the last line. P.S. If you find a dog along the way, keep it. They know things we don't. Harold. R. Webb. She set the letter down. She sat in Harold's chair and looked at Lottie across the desk. Lottie was crying quietly, without sound, tears moving down her face and collecting at her chin. Under the desk, Ranger had pressed his head against Maya's left calf and was holding it there warm and steady, the way he'd held position on 100 patrols grounded. Present, asking nothing. He found me, Maya said. Her voice was almost nothing. Lottie reached across the desk and held her hand. They stayed that way for a long time. In the sealed room that Harold Webb had kept for 12 years, while the afternoon light moved through the small window, and the building held steady around them. The man was standing on the concrete pad when Maya came back from the bank the next morning. He had arrived in a black SUV with clean tires and the particular confidence of someone who measures distance in property values. Silver hair, grey suit shoes that cost more than Maya's remaining balance at Caldwell County Savings before yesterday. A second man stood slightly behind him with a briefcase and the expression of someone being paid by the hour. The silver-haired man saw her coming and straightened. "Miss Cole," he said, "my name is Garrett Pickett. I develop commercial properties in this region. I've had plans for this block for 2 years. Retail on the ground floor, residential above, parking structure adjacent." He looked at the station. "This lot is the parking structure. It's not for sale," Maya said. She walked past them and ducked under the bay door. "Everything is for sale," Pickett said, following to the doorway. "The building cleared $30 over taxes at auction. I'll give you $5,000 today. That's a significant return. It's not for sale." Pickett paused. His expression shifted, not angry, recalibrating the way people recalibrate when the expected response doesn't appear. "The tax auction may not hold," he said. "My attorney has identified a potential irregularity in the title chain. If the sale is contested, the property reverts to the county, and the county has agreed to sell to me." Maya set her bag down and looked at him steadily. She had spent 8 years in rooms with people who were trying to maneuver her into a position she didn't want to be in. She had learned to recognize the architecture of pressure. "I have the deed," she said. "It was recorded by the county clerk. Deeds can be challenged." He put his hands in his pockets. "I'm not trying to make this difficult. I'm offering you a way to walk away with money. This place has already given me more than you know," Maya said. She watched his face. Something there, not calculation, something older. She'd been trained to read faces, and what she saw in his was not greed. It was avoidance. He wanted this building gone. Not built over. Gone. She went to Harold's filing cabinet and found the folder she'd been looking for, the contribution records. 40 years of small amounts in Harold's handwriting, each one logged with a name, a date, an amount. She brought it outside and opened it on the hood of his SUV. She turned the pages until she found what she was looking for. "Frank Pickett," she said. Garrett's jaw tightened. "Your father was a volunteer at this station. He contributed $50 a month for 22 years. Garrett looked at the page. His attorney stepped back. Maya turned to another section, the disbursement records. She found the entry and pointed to it. September 1997. Medical assistance. Caldwell County General Hospital. Patient Elaine Pickett. Diagnosis stage 3 breast cancer. Amount disbursed $18,000. authorized by Chief Harold Webb Station 7 Community Fund. Garrett went very still. He read the entry. He read it again. He looked at his father's name in one column and his mother's name in another. The attorney closed his briefcase quietly. "I'll file a withdrawal on the petition," the attorney said to no one in particular, and walked to his car. Garrett stayed. He moved away from the SUV and sat down heavily on the concrete step at the base of the bay door. He put his elbows on his knees and looked at the cracked concrete pad. He was a man in a grey suit sitting on a step, and the suit no longer seemed to fit him the way it had 2 minutes ago. Maya left him there. She went inside and worked on the drywall in the kitchen for 30 minutes, measuring, marking, cutting with the careful efficiency of someone who has been taught to make clean lines. When she came back out, the attorney's car was gone. The folder of records was still on the SUV. Garrett was still on the step. Ranger was sitting beside him. Not asked, just there, his weight pressing gently against the man's leg, his head turned slightly outward, watching the street with the patient attention of an animal keeping company with someone who needs it. Garrett had his hand on Ranger's neck. His eyes were dry, but his face had the particular hollowness of someone who has just had something rearranged inside them. "My father died on a call," Garrett said when Maya sat down on the step beside him. "Heart attack. I was 19. I didn't come back to this town for 15 years because every time I drove past this station, I felt like he stopped. I thought if I could put something new here, I wouldn't have to keep looking at what I'd lost." He looked at the brick wall. "I thought that would help." "It doesn't," Maya said. Not harshly. As a fact, she also knew something about. He was quiet for a while. The afternoon sun came through the bare November trees and moved across the concrete. "What are you going to do with this place?" he asked. She looked at the station, the open bay doors, the wide concrete floor visible inside the hallway, beyond leading back toward the room where a man who never met her had kept 40 years of his life organized and waiting for her. "I'm going to fix it," she said. 3 months later, the station had walls you could lean against. Maya had started with the bones. New glass in every window frame. Plumbing. Reconnected water running clear after 20 minutes of rust-colored protest from pipes that hadn't moved in 6 years. The electrical panel had been rewired by a retired electrician named Ed Carver, who showed up one Saturday morning without being called and worked for 8 hours and refused payment, and said only that Harold Webb had once covered 3 months of his daughter's rent when Ed's trucking business collapsed in 2009, and he'd been looking for a way to square it ever since. A plumber came the following week and replaced the corroded pipes in the bathroom. A woman who ran the garden center on Route 9 brought flats of marigolds and planted them along the concrete pad. None of them said much about why they came. Each one at some point during the day walked to the back of the station and stood in the doorway of Harold's office and looked at the photographs on the walls for a moment. Then they went back to work. Ray came every morning before opening Santos Hardware. He brought tools and coffee, and a patience for teaching that Maya hadn't expected. He showed her how to frame a wall, how to run electrical conduit, how to cut drywall, to fit around a pipe so the seam disappeared. "Your father could do this in his sleep," he said one morning, holding a level against a stud Maya had just installed. "He taught me half of what I know about framing." Maya adjusted the stud until the bubble centered. "Was he patient?" "Not even a little," Ray said. "He'd pull a wall out and start over if the angle was off by a 1/4 inch. But he was right every time, so nobody argued. The county inspector signed off on a Tuesday. That evening, Maya stood in the truck bay and flipped the main breaker. The fluorescent tubes flickered on, one by one, from the front of the bay to the back, reaching down the hallway, into the kitchen, into the bunk room. The building looked different, lit larger, more possible, like something that had been waiting for permission to be what it was. Lottie moved in 3 weeks later, into the apartment Maya had built in what had been the captain's quarters. 1 room, a small bathroom, a kitchenette, a window facing east. Lottie stood in the doorway the day it was finished and looked at the new drywall and the coffee maker on the counter and the window light coming in at a slant. Harold would have liked this, she said. She moved in on a Wednesday. By the following Monday, she had curtains on the window and a bookshelf against the wall, and had begun turning the cracked concrete in the side lot into raised garden beds filled with soil from the garden centre. She worked slowly on her knees with a hat against the sun, tomatoes, basil peppers, things that required patience and rewarded it. Garrett Pickett showed up on a Saturday in late January with his truck loaded with lumber 2x4s, plywood sheets, cedar planks. He backed up to the bay door and started unloading without a word. Maya came out and helped him carry the lumber inside. They worked in silence for 20 minutes, stacking the wood against the wall. When the truck was empty, Garrett brushed off his hands and looked at the station. "My father would have wanted me to do this a long time ago," he said. "Thank you," Maya said. He got in his truck and drove away. He came back the next Saturday with drywall and the Saturday after that with paint. He never stayed long and never asked for anything. He just delivered materials and left. Maya filed the paperwork for the Harold Webb Community Fund herself, sitting at Harold's desk with the original journal open beside her. The fund operated the same way. Harold's had small amounts, no publicity reviewed individually. Families in need applied through the county office. The fund covered what insurance and government programs missed. The first check Maya issued went to a single mother on Caldwell's west side, whose furnace had failed in January. $700. She signed it at Harold's desk with the same pen she'd used to sign the discharge paperwork 3 months ago, the only pen she'd kept. On a warm Saturday in March, she mounted the brass plaque beside the station's front entrance. She'd had it made at a shop in Millhaven, the next town over, and she'd written the text herself and rewritten it 4 times before it was right. In memory of Thomas E. Cole and Grace M. Process. Cole, volunteer firefighters who gave their lives on October 14, 2004, saving 14 children from the Maple Street School fire. Their courage is remembered. Their daughter carries it forward. Below their names in smaller type were the names of the 14 children. Maya had found the list in Harold's filing cabinet, cross-referenced against the newspaper archives, and tracked down every name. 30 people came to the small ceremony. Ray Lottie, Ed Carver, the plumber, the woman from the garden center, several of the families whose lives had been quietly shaped by Harold's fund. Garrett Pickett stood at the back. He had come alone, and he stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, and he looked at the plaque for a long time. Ray had made a second plaque himself from a piece of the oak shelving he'd replaced at the store. He waited until the crowd had seen the main plaque, and then he stepped forward and mounted his beside it, just to the right, at knee height, the right height for a dog. It read, Ranger, K9 Station 7. The crowd applauded. Ranger sat straight at Maya's left side, his ears up, his eyes forward. His weight evenly distributed, the posture of a soldier receiving a commendation. He held it for a full 5 seconds, which felt to everyone present like exactly the right amount of time. One woman came forward after the ceremony and stood in front of Maya with a quietness that stopped the surrounding conversations. She was in her early 30s with steady eyes and the particular composure of someone who has been carrying something carefully for a long time and has finally found the place to set it down. "My name is Dr. Caroline Marsh," she said. "I'm an emergency physician at Caldwell General." She paused. "I was 8 years old in October 2004. I was on the 2nd floor of Maple Street Elementary." Maya went very still. "Your mother carried me to the window," Dr. Marsh said. "She put me on the sill, and she looked at me and she said, 'Jump and I'll catch you.' And she did, and then she went back in. She held out a small box. Maya opened it Inside, on a fold of white tissue, was a small metal safety whistle, the kind that clips to a jacket. Standard issue for emergency responders. The metal was worn smooth with handling and age. On the back, Scratman. Small letters, G Coal Station 7. She hooked it onto my coat before she lifted me to the window. "Doctor," Marsh said, "I've carried it for 20 years. I didn't know who to give it back to until now." Maya closed her hand around the whistle. She felt the weight of it light nearly nothing, the weight of a small thing that had been in the right hands at the right moment. She looked at Dr. Marsh and could not speak. Dr. Marsh nodded as if that was exactly the right response and stepped back into the crowd. That evening, after the last of the folding chairs had been stacked against the wall and Lottie had gone inside and the bay had gone quiet, Maya climbed the steel ladder to the flat roof. The sun was going down over Harlow Creek. The sky turned from orange to purple along the western ridgeline. The lights in the houses came on one at a time, yellow squares in the darkening town. She sat on the edge of the roof, with her legs hanging over the side, and took out her wallet. The Polaroid. The toddler on the linoleum floor, one hand reaching toward the edge of the frame. She held it for a long time. Then she set it on the ledge beside the photograph of her parents in their turnout gear. The one from Harold's office that she'd framed and brought up here. And beside those she set the safety whistle. 3 things on a ledge. A baby reaching for something. 2 people who had already decided who they were going to be. And the evidence of a choice made in a burning building by a woman who had passed something of herself forward into the hands of a stranger. Below her, Lottie's reading lamp came on through the apartment window. Across the street, Ray locked the front door of Santos Hardware and looked up and raised one hand. Maya raised hers. She heard Ranger's nails on the concrete stair behind her before she saw him. He had found the exterior access stairs at the back of the building, the ones she had propped open that morning and come up the way. He always moved through new spaces methodically without hurry, as if he had already mapped the route. He crossed to her and lay down with his head on her thigh, warm and solid, looking out over the town, with the patient attention of a dog who has found his place and settled into it. She put her hand on his side and felt him breathe. She reached into her jacket pocket and found the discharge envelope. She took out the last form, the emergency contact page, the one with the blank field. She had a pen in her pocket, the same pen she'd used to sign the fund's first check. She set the page on her knee and filled in the field. Name Lottie Webb. Relationship family. She looked at the word for a moment. Then she added a second line. Name Ray Santos. Relationship family. She put the form back in the envelope and held it for a moment, and then set it on the ledge with the photographs and the whistle, and looked out at the town going quiet in the evening light. The blank was filled. The station held steady beneath her. The door was open. The light was on. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment telling me which moment hit you hardest. And let me know where in the world you are watching from right now.